Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending the Financial Activity Invoicing webinar. My name is Tanya Pryor, and I am the Deputy Director for the Office of Broadband within the Division of Community Development. Our office is excited for the opportunity to give you a walkthrough of the financial activity invoicing process within the SARA system. A couple of housekeeping items. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat feature and we will address all questions at the end of the presentation. This presentation will be recorded and we will have the recording within the next 2 business days. Now I will pass it off to Tracy to begin the detailed walkthrough within the SARA system.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. I am Tracy Jones, and I am here as a support to Florida Commerce with all things invoicing for the broadband programs. Many of you I may have spoken with, or you've seen emails from me. I've got my sidekick here.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jessie Blood. I've talked to most of you, but wonderful to work with you today.
So this webinar is to help walk through when you are ready to submit a financial activity. You may call it a reimbursement request. You may also call it your invoice to Florida Commerce. And we want to make sure that there's a full understanding of how the system works when you're going through the process of submitting these requests and your supporting documentation. So we'll go through the first part of the information through the SARA system. Then I'm going to pass it off after my part to our partners with the monitoring team, RSM, and they'll walk through the piece of the process that they handle with regard to broadband invoicing. So the first thing is you'll have access to SARA. SARA is Florida Commerce's system where you submit any of your reimbursement requests. To gain access to the system, you'll work through your Florida Commerce grant manager. They will send you the appropriate forms, and then they will facilitate getting your access. So if you don't have access yet, that should be your first task, is to coordinate with your grant manager for that form completion. Once you have SARA access, we really encourage you to log in and recognize that if you don't log in for, I believe it's a period of 45 days, the system will automatically deactivate your account and you'll be starting over again to request access. So once you get your access, just make it a habit to pop in every couple of weeks, even if you're not submitting a financial activity, in order to keep your account active. Once you are ready to then submit a financial activity into SARA, you're going to see this screen when you log in. And this screen essentially lists your organization. In this test scenario, we are the organization called Florida Commerce Test Account. And you may be used to the term NFA, which stands for Notice of Funding Availability. Please note that is different from an FA, which is actually a financial activity. It can get very confusing when you see NFAs and FAs because they are two very different things. So this test account basically gives you the information here about your organization. When you are ready to submit a request for reimbursement, you may also call it an invoice. You may also call it an FA or financial activity. You're going to start with this screen and you're going to go here to this in progress NFAs. And you're going to click on that. And what this is going to do is going to bring up all of your grant agreements that you have executed with Florida Commerce for the broadband programs. So you could be an organization that has 1 grant agreement or 50. You could be in the Broadband Opportunity Program or the Broadband Infrastructure Program or the Multi-Purpose Community Facilities or the Digital Connectivity or all of them. So you're going to see the listing of your executed agreements. And the best way for you to facilitate the specific agreement you are requesting a reimbursement against is to look at your Notice of Funding Availability number and also your project name. In addition to this data, as you know, your grant agreement also gets what's called a BB number, broadband, and then there's 002, BB 177. Those are broadband numbers we use also to track, and you'll see some of that detail on the back end of the process. But to get you started, you're going to go into your in-progress NFAs, which means these are all your executed agreements that you have with Florida Commerce for broadband. You'll click on that, and what this brings up is information at your grant level. So in this example, you'll see this test account is BB 714, and it is for $15,300,000. So that is your total grant agreement. As you progress in your project and you are ready to submit a reimbursement request for a completion of a milestone in accordance with your agreement, you will then go here first, make sure you're in your correct account, your correct agreement, and you'll click on your cost categories. Now, this is your cost categories as it's delineated in Florida Commerce's system by milestone. If you look at this and it doesn't appear to match your agreement, let us know, or let your grant manager with Florida Commerce know, and they can work to modify. Sometimes contracts have been amended and things have changed and the cost categories haven't quite caught up with it. So your first business is to go to your cost categories, confirm that it's accurate, and then you're going to identify what you're actually requesting in your funds. All right, so this is where you're going to see that once you have requested it. So when you kick off into requesting your actual financial activity, meaning you're ready for the reimbursement, you've completed a percentage of your project, you're finished with a milestone, and you need a new financial activity. So you're going to click there first. And the very first thing you're going to see is a series of options on what type of financial activity this is. You're always going to select reimbursement. These others may look like words that seem relevant, but for this purpose, for broadband programs, whether it's BOP or BIP or multi-purpose or digital connectivity, it's all going to fall under this reimbursement record type. Once this record type is selected, it can't be changed. So keep that in mind. You'd have to begin again if that was inadvertently an alternative was selected. So you'll select reimbursement. Then you're going to select your time frame. This gets somewhat confusing because the way the system works is it gives you a 1 month window, and we know several of your reimbursement requests may cover a period of time greater than 1 month. So it may create this, well, how do I put that whole time period in? Really what you're going to need to do is just put your start. So if you started work, this contract, for example, started July 1st, and that's when you started your work, then you will just select the year 2025 and you'll start that in July. So you'll just pick July, and it will automatically calculate July 1st through July 31st. That will be what shows on record. Your documentation to support this financial activity will actually delineate the true period of performance that you covered the work performed that relates to this particular reimbursement request. So we're going to proceed here. Once you select your time period, you'll go to next. And it doesn't like that time period. So we're going to go back and give a different alternative time period. We're going to say this one starts in December of the year. We'll say August. You can't really have something in the future. And that's a thing to keep in mind when you are identifying your period of performance for your financial activities. You are going to have it be the time frame that you started the work under this agreement and the time period that you finished that particular work in which you're asking for reimbursement. So it has created a financial activity. This is the FA number. And what you're going to do here is this is where you're actually going to do your edit in your cost categories. So that's the first thing you're going to do is you're going to click on your cost categories. And when you hover over this column funds requested, you'll see a pencil here. And so we're going to say for this one, you finished this milestone and you're going to request the $55,000. So that's the funds requested. You might think you're finished here, but please scroll down. And there's a box right here to check that says, yes, this is how much I'm requesting for this particular financial activity for the work I've completed to date. And then I'm going to hit save. So that tells Florida Commerce, puts it in the system. I'm asking for a reimbursement for this deliverable and this milestone completion and this amount. Now, there are many agreements where you have the opportunity to submit financial activity requests along the way. So it could be a percentage of completion, which means that might be a portion of this money, and that you would then delineate that in your funds requested. Okay, now, the next thing right here is this files section. So this is where the detail of the files that are required for each of your agreements will be uploaded or dragged and dropped in. So you would just go into and add files. You can upload your files directly from your hard drive on your computer. You can drag and drop, and this is where the files will be located. So this is what the reviewers will see, and our team as the initial reviewers presently will see these files. And this is where we would be requesting specific information that relates to your particular agreement. And one of the things that we know has created some confusion is what files go with what type of agreement? What do you really need on the reimbursement side of things versus what does the monitoring team need on the monitoring side? So Megan will be going through momentarily what they're looking for and recognize that each has a role in the process as you go through from start to finish. So once you've added your files, you've selected your cost categories, you've confirmed that you are in fact requesting reimbursement, you've got an FA selected, and then you are going to submit it for approval. I'm not going to upload files at this moment just for test purposes and time, but you'll see again this file section. Please remember when you upload files to be in your financial activity. There has been confusion because I will show you momentarily where you're at the NFA level. It also has a file section, but it's not intended to be for your reimbursement request. Those are overarching for your entire agreement. So then you will hit submit for approval, and you can make comments, and then you'll hit submit. And then what happens after you hit submit, it goes into a queue. And there's multiple layers of review throughout the process. The first review is checking to confirm you have all the supporting documentation, that you've got your funds requested outlined in the SARA system. And once that is complete, that's where you usually hear back and forth from us. Our goal is to get the documents solid so that by the time it gets down the line to financial reviews and even to reviews where the vendor, the agency who's cutting the check, not a vendor, Department of Financial Services, who actually cuts the check or transmits the electronic payment, that everything's in order before it gets to them. So that's where you're going to get a lot of the questions. Once the initial review is done, it's going to go over to the RSM team. They have a series of criteria they apply, then they conduct their review. Some reviews on the front end, some reviews they do on the back end, and I'll let Megan walk through what that is. But after you've hit submit, that is all you need to do on this end of things for the request for that particular reimbursement. Jesse, did I miss anything that you can think to add?
You may want to show them just how to get back into that FA.
Okay, excellent. So after you've submitted it, you're back on your home screen and say you're like, oh, well, Tracy's asked me to upload a photograph I forgot to submit with my FA. How do I do that? So you're going to go back into your home screen, go to your in progress NFAs. Again, this is not your financial activity list. This is all your grant agreements. So you may have, again, 1 or 50 grant agreements for these programs. You're going to find the appropriate grant agreement where you've asked for reimbursement. You're going to click on that, scroll down to financial activities, and you can see financial activities that have been submitted. And it'll keep track over time as you submit, get paid, submit, get paid. It'll also keep track if you submit and you're like, oh, I never sent that in. It'll keep track of everything you start. So you can go back in, you'll click on the actual FA, and this is where you can make your edits. You may have forgotten to do a cost category and put the funds requested. You may have forgotten to upload a file or need to add. You're going to just go back in and add it. The one thing to remember here also is that when you are in the in-progress NFAs, excuse me, you're in your financial activity list, and you submit your financial activity, it is really important you actually submit it, because there are instances where once you create it, it'll save it. So you can start an FA, and then if you get sidetracked and need to step away, you can come back to that, say tomorrow, finish uploading your files. It'll keep it in a create mode where you've created it but not yet submitted it. So until you hit that submit button, it's not actually going to be appearing in anybody's queue to review. We've had several instances where subrecipients feel like they've submitted, and lo and behold, it is still in create. So just double check here as you're going through, and you can see all these and make sure that you hit submit. And then just the word of caution that I mentioned previously, when you go into your NFA, again, this is your grant at the high level. This is the whole kit and caboodle. There is a files section here. Do not put your financial activity files here. This won't be visible to our review team, and it will then require a request for a modification on your part. So this file section that is at your NFA level is not tied to your reimbursements. Again, you're going to go to either create a new financial activity, or you're going to actually go into your already created financial activities. And keep in mind as well, every time you hit new financial activity, it creates a whole new record. So, and they don't tie back to anything you've done before. So you'll want to ensure that if you're trying to edit something you've already submitted, that you're going to this section here and finding the appropriate number and making the edit there. Now, we do have checklists that were provided upon onboarding. We've also created a financial activity resource guide that gives these screenshots of these types of things that I've just walked through. We will make sure that those are resent to you. And then in addition, at the end of this presentation, we have created a more comprehensive checklist of all the documentation and who reviews what and when and for which program, because that has been a source of confusion. Certain things are required for multi-person purpose and digital connectivity, i.e. the receipts for the things that you've purchased or were services received along the way must be uploaded at this stage, versus your broadband opportunity and broadband infrastructure. Those are collected usually after payment. So we've got a document that we've coordinated with our RSM partners that helps to delineate what needs to be sent when, and then it has supporting detail that shows what are all the contents of each of these forms. Because as you know, if you've received feedback from us, we often send back if you're missing one small thing on an invoice document or on a cover letter, we'll send that back. And then the final thing before I turn it over to Megan is just something that has created some confusion. When we say invoice, it's easy for subrecipients to feel like the invoices that you have as you do your project. It may be your vendors that you work with or the entities that you buy things from. You do have receipts and invoices from those. The receipt to Florida Commerce is what is needed in this process, where you're asking Florida Commerce for the reimbursement against this grant agreement. So sometimes that's a missing piece we find often, is that, oh, I have to do a receipt to Florida Commerce that says I've completed this much of my project. Here's where I am in accordance with my agreement. Here's how much I'm requesting. So just keep that in mind when you think of an invoice, a financial activity submission, a request for reimbursement. All those mean the same thing. And that is it for this portion of the presentation. I am going to stop sharing now and turn it over to Megan Powers with RSM. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Okay, hopefully everyone's able to see my screen now. Just a brief introduction. My name is Megan Powers. I'm a manager at RSM, and we wanted to take the opportunity today to go through RSM's role as a compliance monitor, as well as clarify the difference in our review and our role from the invoice review process. So RSM has been contracted to perform compliance and monitoring services over the Broadband Opportunity Program, as well as the 3 CPF programs on behalf of Florida Commerce. The goal of our review is to help these projects remain in compliance and ultimately help ensure that the sub-award performance goals are met. RSM performs compliance reviews throughout the life of the project. It could be a combination of desk reviews and/or site visits. Desk reviews typically are performed upon the submission of a payment, whereas site visits are based upon estimated milestone completion. Most of our reviews occur post-payment. However, there are situations in which we will perform prepayment reviews. So after the invoice is submitted to the program administrator, it gets passed along to us, and then we do our procedures if needed. Otherwise, we advance it, and then after the payment is made, that's when we come in and do our desk review. Our review is currently based on a sample. We're not performing 100% reviews on the project. However, compliance requirements vary by program. For all of our sampled transactions, we do expect to see a contract or purchase order. And if there is a contract, we do prefer that over the purchase order, an invoice, and then proof of payment. We do have a slide on what constitutes proof of payment because that's kind of a common error or misunderstanding as we're doing our reviews. So we'll get to that soon. And I also have slides that kind of break out the differences in the programs and the type of documentation that we collect. So for this slide here, I wanted to take a moment to differentiate our review again from that initial review that Tracy just walked us through. So that initial review is collecting and reviewing the required contractual documentation for invoice submission to Florida Commerce. That occurs pre-payment and that is not performed by RSM. RSM's role is to perform compliance and monitoring services to make sure that the costs submitted are allowable and eligible. Again, our review may be pre or post payment, depending on when certain criteria are met, and it is sample-based testing. So a lot of times when we start our review, we send out a monitoring notification letter to let your organization know that we're reviewing a project. Here's the cost that we would like to review, and here's the documentation and the date we'd like to see it by. A lot of times we get pushback because our recipients think that because they went through the initial review, that everything was good and ready to go. And then there's a little bit of frustration that we are coming in and asking for additional documentation. So again, just going forward, knowing these are 2 separate reviews, all projects have monitoring. So no project is singled out. Again, this is something that we do for everyone. On this slide, I've put 3 questions that I feel would be FAQs if we were to ask for questions from the group. So I'm going to go ahead and read those. First one being, if I receive payment, does that mean all costs submitted are allowable? The answer is no. The program administrator is not reviewing the payment request summary for allowability. This is RSM's role and will be reviewed on a sample basis, again, either pre or post payment. Next question that we have is the payment request summary required? Yes, this is how you report the underlying cost invoice to Florida Commerce for each project. Third question, how will I know which costs are selected for compliance review? Your organization will receive a monitoring notification letter, which provides an overview of the review process, the requested documentation, and a link to upload the supporting documentation. We will provide you with a deadline to provide the requested documentation for our review. And please let us know immediately if you're unable to meet the deadline, and we will escalate any missed deadlines or extensions requested to Florida Commerce. So this list of our scope for our reviews is not all inclusive, but it gives an overview of generally what we look for during our desk reviews. Notice the differences here are the BOP and BIP programs. We do not look at procurement or any single audit documentation, as these programs are fixed amount subawards limited to actual costs, and they are not subject to the procurement standards that the multi-purpose community facility and the digital connectivity technology programs are. I guess I'll go through this real quick. We do have subrecipient questionnaires that we send out after each payment is submitted in the system. And then beyond that, if there are any internal labor costs claimed on the payment request summary, we'll do labor testing. Of course, we do invoice testing. That's the majority of our testing. For the 2 programs where procurement standards apply, we look at the procurement policies as well as test the transaction of procurement. We do a financial review for both programs, as well as we look at the SARA monthly reports to make sure that they're being completed timely and that they have the required contractual documentation or information in it. And then we also look for evidence of insurance, which I believe is section 16 of the agreement that lists out the types of insurance and the specifications that are supposed to be on the insurance certificate. And again, this is not everything that we do. It's a high level, but gives a sense of what we're looking at in our desk reviews. So I put together a slide of common observations. This isn't everything, but we do see these items frequently. So the first one is a big one, and this is internal labor not tracking actual time and effort expended on the project. These projects are limited to actual costs incurred. So any project where labor is being claimed on the payment request summary should be tracking actual time and the activities performed in relation to the grant. And this may occur on the timesheet or on what we call an activity log. So most times, one person does not spend 100% of their time on the grant. So what we would expect to see is either in the timesheet or some other tracking system is indicating when each person is working on the grant with a brief description of generally what they're doing. It might be one sentence, it might be a few, but just making sure that, again, the actual time is being tracked and that the activities being performed are allowable in accordance with Exhibit A of the subrecipient agreements. The second item is payment support coming from an internal accounting software instead of an external source. And on top of that, batch payments showing batch payments that do not have a breakdown of what's included in that larger amount is something that we frequently see. I actually have a slide, I think it's in 1 or 2 slides, that will give examples of what is considered adequate external payment support. And I think that the visual will help here. And then the third item is the insurance documentation not referencing the agreement number and or not listing Florida Commerce as an additional insured. So section 16 of the agreements reference the insurance requirements, and most of the certificates that we get initially are missing one or both of those pieces of information. So I recommend reviewing that as you go to submit documentation to make sure it's there. And then the last thing that we see frequently is just incomplete SARA monthly reports, either not being submitted altogether or potentially missing information or not being submitted timely. All right, this next slide provides a little bit more detail on generally what we like to see with the timesheet. So the timesheet should identify either an employee ID or name or another common identifier. It should have the organization name, the dates that they're working, and that should be within the period of performance, a description of the services or work performed. And generally, we should be able to see the total number of hours for the pay period that they work, regardless of whether it's on the grant or not. If the timesheet does not have the ability to track projects and provide descriptions, then that's where we would also request an activity log to supplement that timesheet. And then in instances where an acclaimed employee is salaried and system timesheets are not a standard, some other system or methodology for tracking actual hours are documented and reviewed. So here we have an example timesheet of what, in a perfect world, what we would see. It would have the employee name and ID. It would have the organization name. It would have the start and end date as well as the pay date. And then for each day, we don't always need to see the in and out, but even just the total hours worked. And then in this case, and the activity and description. And so especially if only an hour was spent out of 8 on the grant, and that activity description, even having like a 1-patrol area or whatever that activity is certainly helpful. And then going on to proof of payment. So again, a lot of times we get internal screenshots of the internal accounting software, and that doesn't show that the funds have cleared the bank. So what we typically ask for is either a bank statement, and you're welcome to redact all of the transactions that are unrelated, as long as we can see the subrecipient name, the date, and then the payment amount and who it's going to, then it's perfect on our end. We don't need any of the additional information. Alternatively, if a check is provided, we like to see the front and the back of the cleared check so that we can see that the funds have in fact cleared the account and when. Other things that we are provided, a lot of times we get invoices are part of a larger batch payment. That's perfectly okay. Usually what we're provided in that situation is 2 things. 1, the bank statement showing that larger payment clearing the account. And then 2, a screenshot of the internal accounting system showing everything that's included in that batch payment. And as long as we can see that our invoice is in fact part of that batch payment, then we're good on our end. We do not need or want the invoices for all the other transactions that are unrelated to the grant. I think there was one more thing for payment support, and I apologize, it has escaped my mind. If it comes back, I'll clarify during the Q&A. I think this was it for RSM slides. Yes, it is. So those are common things that we see. We, again, often get confusion on what our role is versus the invoice review, but at the end of the day, we are only reviewing upon submission of the payments, and once the documentation is met and you get to that 100% payment, the goal is that all observations from prior reviews, if they exist, have been cleared, and that final 100% report has no lingering observations. It shows everything is cleared and that we are good to go should this project be reviewed by another entity in the future. And with that, I will pass it back over to you, Tracy and Tanya.
At this time, we will take a brief pause to gather questions. As a reminder, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat feature. We will be back in just a moment.
Okay, thank you everyone for the questions that you put into the chat. As we continue to answer these questions, if it prompts more, please, this is your time for us to help clarify things for you regarding the financial activity process. So the first question, thank you, Lori, and I know Troy from our Florida Commerce team has provided the answer, but we'll just say it out loud for everybody. So Lori's question is, we talked about how to put your timeline at the beginning of your financial activity task, and it'll just allow you to put a month and a year, and it will cap it at a 30-day window, which that's just how the system works. So it should be for that particular reimbursement request that you're asking for, as Troy says, for covering the work that you're invoicing for. So regardless of when your agreement was effective. Now, obviously, it has to be after your effective date. You can't request money for things prior to your effective date of the agreement. But the effective date forward, at whatever point in time you've performed the work, that's what we're gauging. We're in the system, you're putting the beginning date of that month. In your supporting documentations, you're putting the whole period of performance, the day, the month, and the year. So thank you for that question. And then Lori has another question regarding the CC statements, and I'm going to turn it over to Megan to answer that question, and then we'll come back to Evelyn's.
Thank you. And Lori, this was the question that had escaped my mind, so this is perfect. You asked, if we make a credit card purchase, would we submit the credit card statement showing the charge and this bank statement showing the credit card payment? So that would work. What we ask for in that case is the credit card statement showing the charge. And then typically what we're also able to provide is the next month's statement showing that payments were made on the account. and that either the balance is zero or a payment large enough to cover that transaction was made. So that works, or if a separate statement showing the payment to that credit card account would be fine as well. But yes, we do need more than just the credit card statement.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Megan, as well. Evelyn's question was, if all the documentation is provided, about how long does the reimbursement take? And that is a great question. It is partially going to depend on how you, as a subrecipient, have elected to receive the payment, whether it's a paper check you're asking for, or whether it's actually an ACH transfer, an electronic transfer. The timeline varies depending on the complexity of the agreement. Some broadband opportunity programs are very cut and dry. Some multi-purpose community facility projects with lots of construction activities are more complex. So those reviews are going to vary depending. I would say we're seeing anywhere from a month to 2 months, typically from the time the documentation is ready to be moved forward to when payment is remitted. But it is not a hard and fast date. It's a good question, though. Thank you, Evelyn. And then Kelly asked the question about changes anticipated when BEAD comes in for the financial activity submission. And the answer to that one is, once BEAD awardees are identified and agreements are executed with the recipients for those, the financial activity process will be finalized and communicated at that time. But the SARA system, where we just walked through, you're going to have the same SARA system. So the nuances probably aren't going to be dramatically different, but some of the supporting documentation may vary depending on the outcome of those BEAD processes. So that's a great question. But if you got this one down, you're probably going to be good to go for the next one. Any other questions? Any other questions that you guys have thought of? Okay. Since we have a minute more, I'm going to share one of the documents that you all had, that I had mentioned. Actually, we tried to drop it into the chat. I feel like email is probably going to be a more effective solution to getting this out to you. So we will do that. That way you can maintain it and not have to remember to go back to your team's chat for the documentation. So this looks quite overwhelming, but it really helps break down. You have seen a checklist before, very simple, high-level checklist that you received in your orientation onboarding package. We have found that it generates a lot of questions because you all submit, you have different programs, there's an initial reviewer, there's the monitoring review, and it can get very confusing on what documents are needed for which programs. So this just breaks it down into a lot of detail, hopefully to help you as you're going through. You just find, are you submitting it for a broadband opportunity or infrastructure, or is it for multi-purpose community facilities or DCP? And depending on which it is, will determine the level of detail that's needed. Essentially, they are the same. The main difference is when you are in this multi-purpose, it's under the umbrella of what the state of Florida calls a cost reimbursement, meaning it's payment for payment. So you'll have to submit the supporting documentation right here regarding payments that you've made, that you've been billed for from your vendors and your subrecipients and your subcontractors that are all part of what you're asking for reimbursement back from Florida Commerce. Now, that doesn't mean for BOP and BIP, you don't have to maintain them. You absolutely have to keep all of these documents in your records. Just certain ones for certain programs get submitted at the time you ask for the reimbursement. Others are going to come down the line, as Megan was mentioning, through her process in the monitoring team of collecting and reviewing documents. So this is just the list of these documents, where and how they're going to be reviewed and submitted. And then as we go through, there's several tabs here. So there's a cover letter tab, and it just lists out all the things you need to remember to put on your cover letter. So if you've ever sent something in and gotten a request back from the initial reviewer team, it's probably because something here may not be aligning. So this is to help you, just as a reminder, hey, did I get everything on my cover letter I need? Same for the invoice. And again, this invoice is to Florida Commerce. So this is going to have a lot of detail that's required, and your dates and your numbers need to match from your cover letter to your invoice. Some information and tips on photographs, because there have been a lot of questions about what kind of photographs do we need? How many do we need? There's just a little bit of guidance here. Engineer certification, the same. We've had several questions about that. The minority business enterprise and disabled veteran report. This is a Florida Commerce, state of Florida requirement. So this is just to help you remember which sections to complete. And if you actually do have business with certain vendors, that you're communicating those in this report format each and every time you submit a request for reimbursement. And then the payment request template that Megan just walked through, what the intent behind that cumulative record of your expenditures. So this is just to help you, again, delineate the documentation. And we want to make sure that you all have this along with the FA submission guide with the screenshots that walk you through submitting your financial activity. Do we have any new questions? Lori, you're correct. This is a new document. The overarching checklist was definitely confusing, was input into the onboarding process, but we recognize that there has been a lot of really great questions that subrecipients have submitted. And so in an effort to help try and ease the confusion of what am I supposed to submit when and who's looking at it? Why do I get a request from a lady named Tracy and then another one from Jesse and then another one from Troy and then another one from RSM's Megan, and it gets very confusing. So it is, we have a lot of people on these teams that are working hard to get your documentation as support you as much as we can so that it makes it smooth. And I think once you continue through this process, it'll become easier as you go through. If there's other things that are points of confusion, now would be a great time to ask, because if you have the question, somebody else probably does as well. We're happy to answer your questions. A minute more for questions to come through. Okay. We are very happy that we have this opportunity to talk with you today. And if you think of other questions as you go back or when you get into submitting your financial activities or responding to a document request, feel free to reach out and contact us. You may also be able to go back to this webinar and reference it. And we will be sending the documentation that we discussed and shared with you today in a separate email. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tanya with Florida Commerce.
As previously mentioned, this webinar has been recorded and will be available in 2 business days. We thank you for your time today to demonstrate how to correctly submit financial activity invoices through the SARA system. If you have any other questions, please feel free to contact us at broadband@commerce.fl.gov. Thank you.